I was home cooking my dinner in a normal evening. It was about 7 p.m., and I had gotten home about an hour earlier. My dinner wasn't very fancy at all. I was preparing some chicken and rice. I had just finished with the rice and was about to start cutting the chicken when I heard a scratchy noise coming from inside my house. It was very brief and hadn't been loud, but because it was so sudden, I got frightened for a second. I followed with my cooking. I believed it may just have been some noise that the house was making, even though I had never heard it before. But then, not too long after, that scratching sound came back traveling through the walls. The noise was so weird that I had no idea what to make out of it. I finished serving my food, and then went to the front door. I stayed there quietly for a few moments with my ears open. I was trying to see if the noise would come back and if I could locate where it was coming from. I stood there for about 30 seconds without hearing anything, so I came back to the table so I could have my dinner. To be honest, I wasn't very scared at that moment. I was mostly curious as to what those noises in my house could possibly be. But I wasn't nervous at all. I ate for a few minutes and then headed to my couch so I could lay down and watch some Netflix. But while I watched TV, I kept hearing that scratching noise again and again. Eventually, the noise got so frequent that I turned off the TV and stopped to hear the noise, to try and find out what it was and where it was coming from. When it happened again, I was able to hear it more clearly, and I noticed it was coming from somewhere in the second floor of my house. I headed in the direction of the stairs for the second floor, honestly a little stressed because of the noise that wouldn't go away so I could watch my TV show. But I was also a little worried that something could be wrong. I headed in the direction of the stairs for the second floor. When I got to the second floor, I stood at the beginning of the hallway, waiting for the noise to happen again. About a minute went by and no sign of the noise, so I started going in the rooms to check that everything was okay. I couldn't see anything broken or out of the ordinary, so I started to get worried. I put on my shoes and went to the outside of the house, even though it was very dark. I thought that maybe I would be able to see if there were any tree branches getting thrown around by the wind and hitting my house or something of the sort that could possibly be causing that noise. I went to the other side of the house where there was a tree, but it wasn't windy at all. All the branches were far away from my house. I kinda just stood there, trying to find out what was going on and why it had never happened before until that night. I was tired, and that was the last thing I wanted to be doing. I walked around the house heading towards the front door. When I got about halfway, a light showed up in the very corner of my view camp. I turned in the direction and looked. Apparently, it was coming from inside my house. I went to the sidewalk close to the street and looked back to my house, and it was then that I could see a very weak light coming from inside one of the windows in my house. After a few seconds, I noticed that was the window from the attic. I could see the light was moving, almost as if someone was walking over there with a flashlight. I was terrified. Someone was inside my attic, doing God knows what. I stood there in front of the house while I called the police and kept my eyes on the window, and the light kept moving around slowly. But after a few seconds, the light got weaker, and suddenly, it turned right in my direction. It remained that way for a few seconds, and then it went dark. Right after, even from the outside, I could hear heavy footsteps coming from the house. I immediately ran towards my neighbor's yard, trying to explain to the officer on the phone what was happening, and keeping an eye on my house, completely terrified. From where I was standing, my house seemed silent and calm, but that only made the situation even scarier, since I knew something very weird was going on inside. But after a few minutes, I didn't see anything else, and the police finally arrived. They checked the house and then called me in to talk. They told me there were multiple footprints in the attic. There were no signs that someone was living in my attic, which was a relief. However, they found some scratch marks on the wood that formed some weird drawings, although they couldn't find anything meaningful on the marks. Once again, the officers told me it was probably just some kids trying to play a prank on me. As to how they managed to get in, the police believed they were able to go to my roof and then go in through the attic window while I was at work, and that they probably left the house through the back door. I knew that the police was trying to get me to believe that it was all just a prank that some teenagers were doing to get to me, but that didn't make me feel any safer, to know that a group of people were able to enter my house and were in my attic drawing weird things on the wood during the day and at night when I was home. To be honest, the police had no idea what was the true intentions of the group, and the only thing they could do was come up with theories. God knows what those people were planning to do. When I was a kid, I used to live in a standard neighborhood. We had a good house of medium size and my family was just normal. When I turned 7 years old, we adopted a puppy called Billy. He was my best friend for years, and as the years passed by, I started being alone more frequently. But with my dog by my side, I never really felt alone. Unfortunately, that didn't last forever. When I turned 15, my family sold our house and bought a smaller one that was about 30 minutes away from the previous one. The new house was more isolated, and it was a forestry area. Unfortunately, my dog died in that summer of old age. Anyway, I was somewhat relieved that it was summer, because that way I had time to grieve my old friend at home, not having to go to school during that sad phase. After a few days of my family suffering together from the loss of our first dog, things started going back to normal. My parents went back to work, and I started being alone at home again. However, this time I immediately felt a big difference. That was the first time in my life that I was actually completely home alone. Not having Billy with me, I was constantly paranoid and anxious with any noise that I heard, not to mention that we had only moved to the new house a few months ago, so I hadn't even had the time to get used to it. In addition, I didn't know very well the new neighborhood and didn't felt completely safe. Only about a week after my dog's death, we started having a normal day. My parents had gone to work, and I was alone. The house only had one floor, and the distribution of the rooms is basically linear. Once you go in through the front door, there are the kitchen and living room, and right after, a long hallway with some bedrooms on the sides and my parents' bedroom at the end of the hallway. During the week that I spent being home by myself, I always closed all the doors from the hallway. For some reason, I simply didn't like to have the doors open. I felt a weird feeling when they weren't closed. So this day wasn't any different. I crossed the hallway, closing each door until I got to my parents' bedroom. I pulled and closed the door slowly and started walking away. But I realized that I hadn't heard the click from the door closing. So I went back and closed the door, pulling a little hard, and this time I could hear it closing. I went to my bedroom where I had my computer. I closed the door, put on my headphones, and stayed there watching videos for about 2 hours in a row, since I didn't really have anything else to do. But at that time, it was already about 9 a.m., and I was starting to get hungry and ready to have breakfast. I put my headphones on the computer desk and opened the door from my bedroom, walking towards the living room. When I left my room and started walking, I couldn't help but notice something was off from the corner of my eyes. I turned my head to inspect the hallway, and I was immediately paralyzed. The door at the end of the hallway was open, completely open. I probably stood there for almost a good minute, trying to not make any sounds, to try and hear if there was any noises coming from my parents' bedroom. But at that point, I didn't know what to do. I was sure I had closed that door, and there was no way he could have opened it by himself. So I knew someone could be inside the house. But since I hadn't heard anything yet, I had no clue as to where this person could be, and that person could be in any of the rooms at the house. I decided to walk away very slowly and carefully through the living room and towards the kitchen, and while I was walking, I was always turning my head around in all the directions, afraid that someone could be hiding somewhere. When I got to the kitchen, I got one of my dad's big meat knives. I held it very tightly in my right hand. I felt slightly safer, but I was still terrified. I carefully checked the living room and the dining room, looking around trying to see if the intruder was hiding somewhere. And then I got to the hallway. I went to the guest room and tried to open the door slowly to not make any noises, but the door was old and loud. Everything seemed to be in order and in place, and nothing had been moved. I moved away, leaving the bedroom, and closed the door. I was leaving my parents' bedroom for last because it was exactly the bedroom that was open, and I was very scared. The fact that the house was in the middle of the forest only made things worse. I knew there wouldn't be anyone nearby to help. I stood there, close to my parents' bedroom for a few minutes, and I could only see half of my parents' bed while I pressed the knife with my hands and listened closely. It was a deadly silence. The fear only kept growing inside of me as the time passed by. and I screamed, shaking, if there was anyone in the bedroom. But there was no answer. I was trying to act tough, but it was pretty clear that I was afraid. I finally entered the room, and I started looking at the corners. There seemed to be no signs of anyone, just like the other rooms. Nothing seemed to have been moved. I even laid on the floor to look under the bed, but didn't see anyone. I walked to the other side of the bed, and as soon as I noticed a small amount of dirt on the floor, I heard a light knock behind me. I jumped back with my heart in my hands and stared at the bathroom door, which was closed. I could hear a lot of noise coming from inside there, and I could also see a small shadow under the door. A few seconds went by while I was there paralyzed out of fear, until I heard a last knock, followed by the sound of footsteps that came from outside the house. Still in shock with what had just happened, I carefully got closer to the bathroom door and opened it. I immediately noticed that the window was open. I quickly closed and locked the window and ran to my bedroom to get my phone. I don't know why I didn't call the police. I guess it was because I was immature and didn't want them to come here for nothing in case there wasn't actually someone in my house. But looking better at the situation, now I realize it would have been better to go outside and call the police since the beginning. In any case, I called my parents first, then they called the police and went home right away. During the police investigation, they found small marks of dirt from someone's boots all over the house, with the exception of my bedroom. They confirmed it was only one person. However, that person didn't take anything from the house. That was obviously scary and disturbing, which makes the reason for the break-in much more mysterious and unsettling. We moved out of that house a few months later, but mostly because of other problems with the house. Even being in my 20s, I still think about this incident sometimes. I wonder what would have happened if I didn't have my headphones on, and if I had heard the person breaking in, since I would have probably left my bedroom to check, and would have probably been face to face with that person. It is pretty scary to think in the possibilities of what could have happened, but I'm glad that everything turned out okay, except for the fact that the person was never captured. I am a woman, and I am 24 years old. I rent a small house that's fairly close to my job. Nothing like this had ever happened with me before, but after it did, I started being way more careful with who I become friends with. That day started pretty normal, just like any regular day. I went to work, went back home, cooked dinner, and laid on the couch to watch a movie. It was a Friday, and I usually stay up for a little longer since I don't have to work on Saturday. But sometimes I fall asleep without even realizing. I believe part of it is because my body is already used to going to bed early. I put on a movie around 9 p.m. and at some point I ended up falling asleep while the movie played in the background. Not too long after, I was awakened by a sharp and loud sound. It was my phone, and it did a noise that I had never heard before. I grabbed my phone from the couch and tried very hard not to get blinded by the strong light coming from the screen. It was a notification from a message I had gotten on Facebook. When I opened the notification, it brought me directly to the Facebook messaging app, which I had never used before. I was a bit startled when I saw it was a text from a man saying, "Hello." The name sounded familiar, but he was definitely not one of my close friends. I clicked on his profile and noticed we had a friend in common, and we were friends on Facebook for 4 months. That ended up refreshing my memory as to when I accepted his friend request. To be honest, I usually accept friend requests from anyone, as long as that person has friends in common with me. I don't share things that are too personal in the internet, so I've never really worried about this. I went back to the messaging app and replied, "Hey," mostly to be polite, but I also noticed it was pretty late to be texting someone you're not close with. As soon as I sent the response, the 3 dots appeared, meaning the other person is typing back. Then I got a new text. As soon as I read the text, I immediately dropped my phone and screamed. I turned around and started looking at my window. The text said, "I love this movie as well. We could watch it together." But I couldn't see anything outside. It was pitch black. I was shaking. I knew someone was watching me. I felt extremely uncomfortable, not knowing how long he had been doing this. Shortly after, I heard my phone again, and the screen lit up with a new message. I was terrified and stayed there staring at my phone without being able to move myself to look at the message. I can barely remember how long I stood there, frozen, disoriented, until I heard the bell ring. I jumped back again, now with tears in my eyes because I was panicking. I grabbed my phone and called the police. I was scared and crying, but I tried to explain the situation the best I could. The officer on the phone said there was a police car about 5 minutes away. She told me to go to my bedroom and lock the door while I waited for the officer. I agreed and tried to calm myself. When I was about to hang up the call, I got another text on the phone, and another, and the notification noises wouldn't go away until I silenced the phone. I grabbed all my strength to open the messages, and there were 10 messages from the man in caps lock, telling me to open the door, and then the last message said, "Never mind, there's no need." I didn't get the meaning of the last message, but it took only a few seconds for me to find out. I started hearing low thumps coming from the other side of the house. I stayed put and focused on the noises, until I heard a loud bang coming from that direction. This time I could hear the sound more clearly, and I noticed it was coming from my basement. I ran to my bedroom, hearing another even louder bang, followed by the noise of breaking glass. I locked the door crying. I was terrified. I could hear the noises from the man crossing the basement. Soon after, I was able to hear him going up the basement stairs. The door for the basement was locked, but I knew it wouldn't take him very long to go through it. I was able to hear the handle moving, and soon after, he started hitting the door. The noise was interrupted by 3 loud knocks on my front door. "It's the police, open up." I ran towards the front door and let them in. There were 2 cops. I believe they were able to notice how scared I was. I started pointing in the direction of the basement. They pulled their guns and went in that direction right away. The intruder ran down the basement while the cops opened the door. They followed him, and after a brief fight, they were able to arrest him. As it turns out, the man had broken in through the basement window, and that was the noise I had heard earlier. As far as the man's identity, it really was the man that had texted me through Facebook. I thought he had used a fake account, but no, it was his real profile. When questioned as to why he had broken into my house, he said he only wanted to talk to me. Nothing like that had ever happened with me before. That was extremely scary. I used to think things like that only happen in movies and TV shows. Later that week, I checked my friends list on Facebook and removed everyone I didn't personally know. It's sad that I had to do it, but I guess that's the world where we live in.